Hey guys, tonight we set out from a place so quiet you can practically hear the frost deciding whether it wants to melt or just give up entirely. You're standing at the edge of a small French village in the mid-17th century, boots half sunk in cold mud, looking like someone who absolutely did not sign up for what's coming. And honestly, if you knew the full itinerary, you might turn around, go home, and claim you twisted your ankle on a suspiciously aggressive turnip. But that's the thing. This journey begins long before you realize how deep the ocean will reshape you. If you enjoy these quiet journeys, I invite you to like, subscribe, or share a thought below. It helps others find their way here too, one sleepy soul at a time. But for now, just breathe. Allow your eyes to grow heavy and your body to soften, and let the hush of winter carry you to sleep. Let's begin. You take a step forward, and the village behind you shrinks into a memory, a place of simple lives, stitched clothing, and days shaped by whatever the earth decides to grow. It's the kind of place where news travels on foot, gossip travels even faster, and opportunities for someone like Jean Barret barely travel at all. You can almost feel how the air in these narrow paths held her, sharp with poverty, heavy with limits, and yet somehow filled with determination she never said out loud. The history books like to summarize this part of her life in a line or two, as if born poor in Burgundy explains everything. But when you're walking through it, when you're literally stepping into her cold mornings, her long hours, her stubborn will, you understand this wasn't some romantic origin story. It was survival. And survival shapes people in ways historians still debate, especially when they try to decide how much of Jean's later choices came from ambition or necessity, or simply the fact that women weren't allowed to do much beyond what society approved. Academic circles still argue over that, by the way, and they will probably keep arguing until the sun gives up and extinguishes itself. You continue down the uneven road, and the world feels like it's opening by a millimeter at a time. Jean grew up in a landscape of vineyards, livestock, long winters, and even longer workdays. Nothing about it suggested that one day she'd circle the globe. It's like imagining your local grocery cashier secretly training to go to Mars. Technically possible, but emotionally, your brain still goes, wait, really? But this is where the silent voyage begins, not on a ship, not in an exotic port, but in the slow burn of a mind that refuses to accept the boundaries drawn for it. Jean had no formal schooling, but she absorbed knowledge the way dry soil drinks rain. Plants, roots, herbs, tinctures. She learned to read nature like a textbook no one else bothered to open. By adulthood, she'd become what people then called a herb woman, a healer whose hands knew exactly what leaf might soothe a fever and which one might send a grown man into a 3-day existential crisis. A fun historical footnote: some of those plants are still used today, though usually with clearer labeling and fewer accidental hallucinations. As you walk farther, you feel winter thinning, replaced by the faint sense that something is pulling you forward. Because somewhere beyond this village, Jean crosses paths with Philibert Commerson, the ambitious botanist whose name is now glued to dozens of plant species. History likes to highlight his credentials, but what it glosses over is that Jean's encyclopedic knowledge of local flora was so impressive, he quickly realized her mind was its own kind of library. Some historians suggest she might have been the true powerhouse of their botanical partnership. Others disagree, because historians famously love disagreeing. It's essentially their cardio. You follow the faint trail leading out of the village, imagining Jean making this same quiet departure. No grand farewell, no dramatic speech, no swelling orchestral soundtrack, just footsteps, breath, and a weight in her chest that probably felt like a mixture of fear and possibility. She wasn't heading toward fame. She was heading toward a life that didn't exist for women in her era. And she had no idea yet how many rules she'd have to break, bend, or completely ignore just to stay afloat. The road opens into fields, brown and bare from winter, but you can almost see the shape of something forming in the distance, a route toward Paris, toward science, toward a voyage not yet announced, but already drifting into destiny. The thought hits you. If anyone told her then what she was going to attempt, she might have laughed, or maybe she would have paused, nodded once, and said nothing. Because some journeys don't need approval. They just need courage, and you feel that courage in the air now, this soft but steady hum guiding your steps. It wasn't loud, not yet. It was a silent vow, the kind you make when the world tells you no, but your bones whisper, go. That whisper carried Jean farther than anyone expected, from healer to assistant to unofficial botanist, and soon to the edge of the world as she knew it. You keep walking, knowing that once she left this village, her life was never going to fit neatly into society's boxes again. Her story was already bending history, quietly, stubbornly, in ways no one could see from here. The horizon ahead feels heavier, brighter, and a little dangerous, and you realize with a slow breath, this is where the voyage truly began, not with a ship, but with a step. You move deeper into the waking world of 18th century France, and the path beneath your feet shifts from cold soil to the uneasy tremble of decisions that can't be undone. Somewhere along this quiet stretch, maybe in a rented room, maybe in a shuttered corner of Paris where the walls smelled faintly of ink and boiled linen, you slip into the moment Jean Barré first understood the magnitude of what she was about to try. Not dream about, not wouldn't it be nice if, but actually do. And you, standing there with her, sense the same tremor, the edge where life diverges into the kind of story scholars still argue about centuries later. Her world had rules, and those rules were about as flexible as a frozen baguette. Women did not sail with naval expeditions. They did not sign up for scientific voyages. They did not circle the globe. Honestly, even most men didn't. The idea of a global expedition was so wild that people routinely wrote farewell letters before leaving, just in case they never came back. And here you are, tightening the bindings of a disguise that feels equal parts daring, foolish, and inevitable. You pull on coarse trousers, a shirt that scratches your collarbone, and a jacket heavy enough to make your spine reconsider its life choices. You wrap your chest tight, too tight if you're honest, but you can't risk a seam shouting your secret to the world. Jean would have known exactly how to do this, the same way she knew how to recognize a root by smell or soothe a fever with a bundle of leaves. This too was survival. And survival, as you're learning, makes you resourceful in ways polite society never teaches. A small scrap of mirror catches your eye. You lean in, face shadowed, hair tucked under a cap, the new name settling over you like a second skin. Jean. It's short, simple, and close enough to your real name that you can respond without hesitation. That's the trick with lies that must be lived. They need to fit you so well that they don't snag on your daily movements. There's something strangely American about this moment, even though you're years away from crossing the Atlantic. The spirit of reinvention, the idea that a person can shed an identity like an old coat and claim a new one. That's the heartbeat of so many stories, from frontier myths to Hollywood transformations. Jean isn't chasing fame or reinvention in a glamorous sense. She's chasing access, knowledge, possibility, things the world told her she wasn't allowed to touch. Yet here she is, about to rewrite herself in handwriting bold enough to confuse the official record for centuries. And yes, historians still debate the exact logistics of her disguise. Some say Commerson helped her plan every detail. Others argue she was the mastermind. Some insist everyone on the expedition was clueless. Others suspect the crew knew but shrugged because they needed the skills she brought. Academia loves being undecided. It gives conferences something to talk about over cold coffee. You step into the street wearing your new name, and the city slides around you in muted colors. Paris is loud, but your footsteps stay quiet. You keep your posture slightly hunched, hands tucked in sleeves, moves understated. You're not here to stand out. You're here to slip past the threshold of an impossible door. Men walk around you with unearned ease, chatting about wages, wine, the weather, and whatever big world lies beyond the Seine. You walk among them now, and it feels strange, like infiltrating a club that didn't think to put your name on the sign-in list. Their boots click on cobblestones with a confidence you're still practicing. You make a mental note. Lower your voice, widen your stance, nod less, observe more, and maybe try not to smile too often. Apparently, in this era, men believed smiling too much might cause emotional allergies. You navigate toward the docks, where the smell shifts to salt, rope, and the metallic sigh of ships settling into their own weight. A roster hangs near the harbor, ink drying in the cold air. Your eyes skim the names until they land on the one you now have to answer to. Seeing Jean there, official, recorded, unquestioned, gives you a jolt of something that feels almost like flight. But before you can savor it, your brain reminds you, this is the 18th century. If anyone discovers who you really are, the consequences could be brutal. Not cinematic, not heroic, just socially and legally crushing. France had strict rules about women aboard Navy or expedition ships. Strict as in, no, absolutely not, don't even think about it. And here you are, thinking about it harder than anyone ever has. Yet beneath the fear, there's a current pulling you forward. The botanist Commerson needs help, real help. His health is shaky, his ambitions enormous, his scientific hunger impossible to satisfy alone. And you, wearing your disguise, carrying your knowledge, are becoming the missing piece in a puzzle that might change the way Europe sees the natural world. You look toward the ship you will soon board, the Étoile. From here, it doesn't look like a vessel meant to touch the edges of the earth. It looks like a wooden contradiction, small but determined, creaking but capable. The maritime equivalent of someone who insists they can run a marathon despite having only ever jogged after a bus. But this ship, along with the grander La Boudeuse, will soon launch one of the most ambitious French expeditions of the era, the Bougainville expedition, a voyage meant to map, measure, collect, and claim knowledge across oceans the Europeans still drew with guesses and decorative sea monsters. You stand there, disguised, heartbeat matching the slow rhythm of waves slapping the hull. And something about the moment feels almost meditative. You're stepping into a new life, not the one society assigned you, but the one you carved out with grit and a slightly reckless commitment to curiosity. A man bumps your shoulder as he passes, muttering an apology without looking up. He doesn't see you, really see you, and that's perfect. You don't need to be seen yet. You need to blend, to last, to endure. You need time. You pull your cap lower, breathe in the salt air, and let the disguise settle into your bones like a language you're suddenly fluent in. This is not just a costume. It's your passport, your shield, your entry ticket to everything you were told not to dream about. The étoile waits, ropes creaking like old men stretching, sails half lowered in a posture that suggests both patience and warning. You feel the weight of what lies ahead, storms, secrets, discoveries, and a truth you'll need to carry with the steadiness of someone who cannot afford a single misstep. And still, you walk forward. Because tonight, you're not Jean Barret. Tonight, you're Jean. And this quiet transformation is the moment the entire voyage begins to breathe. You step onto the gangplank of the Étoile with the cautious enthusiasm of someone boarding a ride they absolutely were not tall enough for, but somehow convinced the attendant otherwise. The wood beneath your boots groans, as if the ship itself is giving you a slow, judgmental once-over. Salt wind curls around your face, tugging at your cap, carrying a mix of sea spray, rope fibers, and something else you silently hope is just old fish and not a preview of your living conditions. The deck feels alive, not lively, alive. Ropes twitch, sails ripple like restless lungs, and crates shift with a thud that reminds you gravity is the only crew member here who always shows up on time. You try to blend in, walking with an air of, yes, I too have done this before, confidence while internally negotiating with the universe to not let you trip over a coil of rope in front of witnesses. Historically speaking, sailors could be ruthless mockers. The last thing you need is someone saying, "Hey, that new guy moves like a startled cat," because startled cats are famously not masculine in this time period. You inhale, and the ship's ecosystem reveals itself. Damp planks, tar, sweat, wet fabric, and an unmistakable undertone of mildew that has achieved full spiritual awakening. You make a mental note that this scent is here to stay, like a roommate who pays no rent and refuses to leave. Around you, the crew is busy with pre-departure chaos. Men shout instructions that echo off the masts, but you're careful not to stare too long or too hard. Too much eye contact might invite questions, and you're still perfecting your silent guy with mysterious backstory persona. Lucky for you, ships of the era were full of those. Sailors came from every layer of society, farm hands escaping debt, city boys chasing adventure, and men who looked like they'd lost a bar fight with the century itself. You keep your head down and carry a crate when asked, mostly because refusing would draw attention, and also because crates are socially acceptable camouflage. People look at crates, not at faces carrying crates. This is your new strategy. Become crate adjacent. You grip the hammock like you're clinging to the world's most unpredictable swing, rocking back and forth while listening to sailors snore in a harmony that feels like a bar fight between bullfrogs and bagpipes. Every morning, the deck comes alive with a mix of chores, shouted orders, and the kind of laughter you only hear from people who've been awake since before sunrise and have already accepted the fact that they'll smell like salt and regret indefinitely. You join them quietly, doing your best to imitate their energy, which ranges from mildly functional to strategically conserving effort. Climbing rigging remains firmly outside your skill set, but lifting crates, assisting with supplies, and blending into the rhythm that you can manage. With every passing day, the ocean spreads wider and blanker around you, and there is something to be said about the unsettling realization that land, that reliable and unmoving friend, is now out of reach. Historical records mention sailors struggling with the psychological shock of this, but those records usually skip the part where you're standing on the deck at dawn, looking at nothing but water and thinking, "Ah, yes, the void. Nice." Still, there's beauty in it, beauty and danger constantly negotiating their terms. The sky stretches in an uninterrupted dome, the clouds moving in slow clusters that feel almost scripted. You watch the sun rise like someone gently turning up the dimmer switch on the world. You watch it set like someone quietly powering down a theater. And in those moments, dawn and dusk, you feel something shift inside you. A thin ribbon of possibility, or maybe defiance, or maybe both. Commerson spends much of these early days ill, his fragile health proving itself to be a villain you didn't ask for. Seasickness hits him like a rebellion from within, and your role as his assistant expands instantly. You fetch water, sort tools, steady him when the ship lurches, and try to anticipate what he needs before he has to ask. The disguise becomes less of a costume and more a shield, protecting him from scrutiny, protecting you from exposure, and protecting the expedition from losing a man whose contributions were already expected to be monumental. There's a strange duality to life aboard the Étoile. On the surface, everything is busyness, ropes, sails, repairs, daily tasks. But underneath, there's a slower current, the scientific mission. You assist Commerson in organizing instruments, glass jars, drying papers, and the precious notebooks he treats like sacred scripture. He speaks quietly, often in half-finished thoughts, as if his mind is 5 chapters ahead of his surroundings. Sometimes he forgets you're supposed to be just an assistant, and his reliance on you becomes almost too revealing. Historians still argue about how much the officers guessed, or how much Commerson protected you intentionally. But academic debates tend to assume lives run on logic, when the truth is, people are unpredictable, and relationships even more so. One afternoon, when the sea is calm enough that the deck feels like a lazy cradle, you help Commerson lay out his nature journals. He sketches leaves from memory, roots he once studied in the forests around Burgundy, models of flowers he hopes to discover. You watch his hands tremble slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of so many ideas waiting for the right soil. And as you lean over the table to steady the ink, a thought crosses your mind. Quiet, but sharp. You belong here. Not here as Jean. Not here as Jean. Here as someone who sees the world differently, who sees plants not as background scenery, but as stories with stems. Someone whose mind catalogs details the way other people collect anecdotes. A healer reshaped into a scientist, whether the world approves or not. Days stretch into a pattern that feels almost comfortable, but the ocean, like an unpredictable narrator, dislikes letting anyone get too cozy. One evening, a storm approaches, rolling across the horizon like a massive shadow deciding it wants to join the party uninvited. The crew starts preparing, shouting, tightening ropes, lowering sails, clearing the deck. You do what you've learned. Stay close, stay useful, stay unnoticed. The wind picks up fast, snapping the edges of the sails like angry punctuation marks. The sky shifts from gold to gray to a shade of blue that looks like it's holding its breath. Waves begin to rise, not terrifying, not yet, but enough to make the deck tilt under your boots with a warning. Storms at sea are a test, not just of skill or equipment, but of nerves. Sailors in this era didn't have satellite forecasts or comforting assurances from meteorologists named Brian. They had instincts, superstition, and a stubborn refusal to admit when fear was gnawing at them. The rain comes down in sheets, sharp and cold, blurring the horizon into a watercolor smear. You help secure Commerson's instruments below deck, bracing yourself against the ship's swaying. The lantern swings wildly above you, casting shadows that leap across the walls like restless ghosts. But even here, in this cramped, flickering space, you feel an odd steadiness. You breathe with the storm, you match its rhythm, you wait it out, and eventually, after hours that feel elastic, the storm thins. The ship groans one final time, as if complaining about having to work overtime, and then settles into a calmer sway. The crew slowly relaxes, shaking off the tension like wet dogs who refuse to acknowledge they were scared. When you step onto the deck again, the night sky has cleared into a breathtaking sprawl of stars. More stars than your village self ever imagined possible. They glow above you, like lanterns hung from the ribs of the universe, lighting the quiet aftermath. You lean against the railing, letting the cold wind dry your hair, your disguise, your lungs still buzzing with adrenaline. And in that moment, you feel something unmistakable. Connection to the voyage, to the science, to the risk, to the version of yourself no longer willing to shrink. This is merely the beginning. The world ahead is vast, unknown, uncharted, and you're already sailing into it. You ease back into the ship's daily rhythm, but this time, your world narrows to a quieter, greener orbit. The small, cluttered workspace where Commerson keeps his precious botanical treasures, and where you, hidden behind your borrowed name, begin to build a legacy no one will fully credit you for until long after you're gone. If ever. Scholars are still debating that part, by the way, and at this point you suspect they mostly enjoy the arguing. The Etoile may be a supply ship, but in Commerson's corner, it feels like a floating forest waiting to happen. Jars clink with every swell of the waves. Rolls of parchment slide in rebellious slow motion, and bundles of drying leaves sway overhead like tiny leafy hammocks. You spend your days securing specimens so they don't go airborne and take out an unsuspecting sailor, a thing that absolutely could happen, considering half the plants Commerson collects have stems like medieval weapons. Your tasks range from scraping mud off roots to labeling specimens so hastily that the ink sometimes forms what can only be described as botanical hieroglyphics. But even in the chaos, you feel something settle inside you, a quiet sense of rightness, like you're standing exactly where the story has been trying to place you all along. It surprises you how quickly Commerson's work becomes yours, too. You're the one with the steady hands, the good eyes, the instinct for what might matter. Back home, people called Jeanne Barret a herb woman, said with that mix of admiration and suspicion, usually reserved for someone who can predict rain by sniffing the air. But here your knowledge becomes something else entirely. Essential, powerful, scientific. You kneel beside crates of plants collected during brief stops along the South American coastline. Some are familiar cousins to species you've seen before. Others look like nature decided to experiment with shapes at 3 a.m. and never bothered to revise the drafts. Commerson sketches as you sort, and more often than not, you're the one identifying the plant's closest relatives or suggesting which roots might reveal useful traits. If the officers suspect anything about you, they certainly don't suspect that the quiet assistant in the corner is the real engine keeping the scientific mission from falling apart. Of course, not all the discoveries are glorious. Some days, the ship smells like a greenhouse crossed with a damp cellar, crossed with a situation you don't have the vocabulary for. You'd think science would smell like clean parchment and enlightenment. It does not. Sometimes it smells like moldy cabbage touched by destiny. But every once in a while, something extraordinary happens. One morning, after a night of uneasy sleep in your hammock, uneasy because the sailor snoring above you has developed a rhythm eerily similar to that of a broken church organ, you step onto deck and find a delivery waiting. A crewman hands you a small bundle collected from a coastal inlet the day before. Leaves veined like delicate lace, roots pale as morning frost, petals curled inward as if they're shy. You begin examining it with the careful excitement of someone opening a gift from the universe. Commerson joins you, leaning heavily on the railing. His health is worse lately. Sea life does not agree with him, and the ocean is not polite enough to pretend otherwise. You hold up the plant for him to inspect, and he smiles faintly. One of those rare, quiet smiles that mean more than any speech.
He knows what you've begun to understand. The expedition will produce hundreds, maybe thousands of documented species. But some of those discoveries will come from your hands, your knowledge, your intuition. You're not just assisting the botanist, you're shaping the mission. Later, you arrange leaves on drying paper, smoothing them carefully so future scholars, well, the less argumentative ones, will have a clear record. You imagine someone studying this specimen decades from now, squinting at the notes, completely unaware that the handwriting belongs to a woman disguised as a man, disguised as a footnote in someone else's biography. That's the strange irony of your days aboard the Étoile. You're everywhere and nowhere at once. You're essential and invisible. You're writing yourself into history with ink that won't show your name. As you work, the ship groans in that familiar, theatrical way that suggests it was built to complain. Waves slap the hull. Sailors above you shout about ropes and knots and other things you've accepted you will never fully understand. But down here, in this cramped botanical nook, time stretches differently. The world outside is loud, salty, and unpredictable. Here, everything is quiet concentration, careful documentation, the soft scratch of ink, the rustle of leaves. One afternoon, as you're securing jars in preparation for yet another stretch of rough seas, you stumble across a plant so strange-looking you momentarily suspect it's judging you. Long tendrils, curling edges, a shape that feels almost creature-like. Commerson takes one look and mutters something about unprecedented morphology, while you immediately think, this is definitely the kind of plant that gets its own chapter in natural history books if it doesn't get seasick first. Little do you know. Well, you know now, because you're here decades later listening to this story in the soft glow of imaginary moonlight, that discoveries like these will eventually be linked to Commerson's name. Your name will go missing for a while. Actually, a long while. Academic circles will later debate how much of the work was actually yours, which is historians speak for. We're pretty sure but not ready to commit emotionally. Still, none of that matters in this moment, because you're here, you're learning, you're building a scientific legacy quietly, secretly, stubbornly. And the ocean, vast and endless outside the hull, feels less like an obstacle and more like a door you've already started to unlock. You barely get a chance to settle into the calm rhythm of cataloging specimens before the ocean decides it's time to remind you who's really in charge out here. 1 minute you're arranging leaf samples in a neat grid that would make any future botanist proud. The next, the air tastes different, heavier, sharper, like the world has suddenly developed opinions. Sailors start glancing at the sky with that very specific expression people get when they're trying to figure out whether the weather is about to ruin their entire day. Storm season isn't an official term in the 18th century, but if it were, you'd be knee-deep in it right now. The wind picks up first, carrying the scent of an incoming squall, wet, electric, and slightly metallic. It sweeps across the deck, tugging at loose ropes and slapping sails so hard, you briefly suspect they're filing workplace harassment complaints. You hold on to a rail to steady yourself because the ship has begun that subtle pre-storm sway, the one that feels like a warning whispered in timber. And then, without waiting for applause, the sky breaks open. Rain pours down in thick sheets, soaking you instantly. The deck transforms into a slippery obstacle course, and sailors scramble to secure anything that even thinks about moving. You join the rush, hauling crates towards safer corners and hoping your disguise holds up better in storms than your balance does. Commerson, meanwhile, is tucked below deck with his notebooks and ailments, which, if you're honest, is probably the safest place for a man who once tripped on his own equipment and nearly discovered gravity twice in one day. The sea begins to heave in great rolling swells, lifting the étoile as if the ocean is trying to read the underside of the ship like a menu. You grab anything stable to steady yourself, whether it's a mast, a rope, or a very unimpressed sailor who gives you a look that says, "Do not make this a habit." Storms on 18th century voyages were no joke. You've read about them in history books written long after this expedition returned home. Tales of ships losing masts, supplies, and unfortunately, sometimes crew. But reading about it is one thing. Living through it is something else entirely. You feel every creak, every groan, every tilt of the deck, like the ship is trying to communicate in loud wooden syllables, and the message roughly translates to, "Hold on tight." I make no promises. There's a strange beauty in it, though. The sky flashes in quick, violent bursts, revealing the ocean in glistening fragments. The waves shine like dark glass, lifting and dropping the ship in a rhythm that feels almost alive. This is the part sailors talk about in hushed tones, the kind of storm that tests your knees, your stomach, and your ability to remain calm while the universe shakes your bedroom like a snow globe. Between securing supplies and trying not to slide across the deck like a loose spoon, you think about Jean, your real self, holding on to this disguise with both hands. Storms make secrets harder to keep. People yell, clothes cling, eyes sharpen. You have to work twice as hard to look like you belong, even though your heart is somewhere between your throat and the soles of your boots. And yet, somehow, you manage it. You copy the crew's movements, grit your teeth through the worst of the rocking, and keep your voice as calm and low as possible when the officers bark orders your way. Historians still argue about how much the crew suspected during storms like this. Some claim Jean's disguise was flawless. Others argue sailors are observant by necessity. After all, when you spend your life in close quarters with dozens of strangers, you notice everything. Who snores, who can tie knots, who panics, who doesn't. But whether they suspected something or simply believed you were an unusually private young man, no record suggests they confronted you. The important part is, you endure. Hours pass in a blur of rain, roaring wind, and the ship bucking like it's auditioning for a rodeo. When the storm finally breaks, slowly, reluctantly, you feel the deck quiet beneath your boots. It's like the sea has sighed itself out and decided to take a nap. The crew collapses into a state of exhausted relief. Some slump onto coils of rope, others lean over the railing, breathing hard, and a few pretend they were never worried at all. Sailors love pretending that. You help check for damage, torn canvas, cracked boards, a few barrels that seem to have staged an escape attempt. But remarkably, the Etoile holds. She's stubborn, like you. Maybe that's why you're starting to feel oddly connected to this creaky, perpetually damp vessel. Below deck, Commerson looks like he missed the entire apocalypse, which is both impressive and slightly insulting. He asks, with a weak wave of his hand, how the storm was. You respond with the kind of vague shrug that says, "Oh, wet." When things finally calm, you step alone onto the deck and watch the clouds drift apart. The sea settles into a gentler roll, almost soothing after the chaos. The air feels fresher, like the storm scrubbed everything clean, including the doubts you didn't want to admit you had. You imagine your village back in Burgundy, where storms were something you watched from a stable doorway or under a roof that leaked exactly in the same spot every year. Out here, storms are different. They're a test of spirit, a reminder that the world is larger than anything you've known, and that you're choosing, actively choosing, to be part of it. There's a significant historical note here too. Storms were both a curse and an opportunity for 18th century expeditions. They destroyed supplies, but also forced crews into survival mode teamwork. Records from voyages like Bougainville's mention storms shaping crew dynamics, sharpening leadership, and occasionally revealing who wasn't cut out for life at sea. And yet, they rarely mention the quieter truths, the fear, the resolve, the way a storm could shake a person's identity loose and reveal the steel beneath it. Tonight, with the sky slowly clearing into a soft watercolor dusk, you feel that steel settling into place. You survived the storm. Your secret survived the storm. And somewhere deep in the hull, your botanical notes survived too, which feels like a tiny miracle. The universe snuck into your pockets while you weren't looking. You lean on the railing, breathe in the salt air, and let the afterglow of survival sit with you. Not triumph exactly, more like a quiet, stubborn persistence. The voyage is changing you, wave by wave, storm by storm, and the ocean, which once felt endless and intimidating, now feels like a companion who's testing your resolve in its own unpredictable way. You ease into the chill of southern waters before you even realize the world has tilted on its axis. One morning, you step onto the deck expecting the same breathable, swaying warmth you've grown used to. And instead, the air slaps you with a cold so sharp it feels like the ocean just handed you a bill for existing. You pull your jacket tighter, partly for warmth, partly because shivering too hard might make your disguise rattle. The ship creaks differently here. The étoile feels heavier, slower, like she's bracing herself for whatever nonsense the southern seas plan to hurl your way. Sailors move with half their usual swagger and twice their caution, their breath fogging in the frigid air. Even the ropes look colder, stiffer, as if they're questioning their life choices. You're nearing the waters around Cape Horn, the infamous, unforgiving edge of the world that 18th century sailors talked about the way people now talk about haunted houses or questionable leftover sushi. No one trusts it, everyone fears it, and surviving it becomes a story you tell for the rest of your life in a tone that says, "Listen, I have seen things. It doesn't matter that it's summer in the southern hemisphere. Cape Horn laughs at seasons. Cape Horn invents its own seasons, and its favorite is freezing chaos with a side of existential dread." As you stand at the railing, the cold wind bites your cheeks with an enthusiasm that feels personal. The waves rise higher, darker, edged with white froth that looks like the ocean is gritting its teeth. The horizon stretches wide and empty, a reminder that in this part of the world, everything human, your ship, your science, your disguise, is startlingly fragile. You hear sailors mutter superstitions under their breath. Whistling is banned today. Apparently, it invites the wind. Someone nails a bit of worn rope to the mast for luck. Another kisses a medallion so fervently you worry he might swallow it. This region brings out every belief men carry, no matter how illogical. And honestly, you don't judge. If someone told you wearing socks on your hands would calm the waves, you'd consider it. Historians still argue whether sailors truly believed these rituals, or whether they simply needed something to feel in control. But standing here, watching the ocean twist itself into towering hills of water, you understand perfectly why superstition thrives in places like this. Logic is too small to hold the entire fear. The ship starts to pitch harder, not the playful rocking of earlier days, but a deep, bone-level movement that feels like the sea is trying to roll the étoile over and read the fine print on her underside. You widen your stance, gripping the railing while trying very hard not to look like someone who is deeply rethinking their life decisions. Below deck, Commerson is in full misery mode. Seasickness hits him the way taxes hit the unprepared. Sudden, unforgiving, and repeatedly. You check on him between your own duties, steadying his equipment and pretending not to notice how pale he's become. If anyone on board suspects your identity, they certainly don't question your dedication to the botanist, though your constant presence might be raising eyebrows in ways you can't afford to think about too long. Back on deck, the wind howls with a pitch that sounds almost human. The sails strain, the rigging groans. You join a group hauling on soaked ropes, the cold sinking into your hands until you can barely feel your fingers. You plant your boots into the wooden planks and hope they stay planted. The whole world is tipping, rising, falling, like you're inside the lungs of a sleeping giant who's having a nightmare. And yet, even amid the chaos, you find moments of surreal beauty. The clouds hang low, dragging streaks of silver across the sky. The waves catch the light in deep blues so rich they feel painted. When the ship crests a swell, you glimpse mountains far in the distance, sharp, dark shapes jutting out of the sea like ancient guardians watching your every stumble. Navigational records from expeditions like this one always emphasize the danger, the wind patterns, the unpredictable currents, the narrow passes, but they rarely capture the emotional reality, the strange clarity that comes from facing something so massive, so merciless, that all your smaller fears fall away. You're cold, yes. Exhausted, yes. Gripping your disguise with the strength of 1,000 lifetimes, absolutely. But you're also awake in a way you've never been before. At lunch, you choke down a biscuit so hard it might actually be older than the ship. The water in your cup is colder than your optimism. A sailor across from you mutters that rounding Cape Horn adds 10 years to a man's reputation. You nod, pretending you're simply absorbing the wisdom. Inside you think, if I make it through this, I want 20 years. Night comes quickly down here. The cold sinks deeper, turning your breath into clouds that drift away like tiny ghosts. The sea glimmers under moonlight. No calmer, but strangely mesmerizing. You step onto the deck during your break, watching the stars flicker, thousands of them, sharp and bright, as if the universe has decided to distract you with beauty while it rearranges the furniture beneath your feet. This is the same sky ancient navigators followed, the same stars sailors whispered wishes to, the same constellations Commerson will one day write notes under. And here you are, Jean, disguised as Jean, looking up at them not as symbols of destiny, but as silent witnesses to your impossible journey. A wave crashes against the hull, spraying you with icy foam and reminding you that Cape Horn doesn't do sentiment. You pull your cap lower and brace yourself for another round of the ship's relentless dance. The cold here is not just temperature, it's memory, the kind that settles into your bones and stays long after warmth returns. You breathe out slowly. Your breath fades into the dark. You are still standing. You are still here. And with every shudder of the étoile, you feel the Southern Crossing shaping you, stealing you, quietly carving away the parts of your old life that no longer fit. Ahead lies landfall. Ahead lies discovery. Ahead lies the next version of you. You reach the first sight of land, not with triumphant music or dramatic shouting from the mast, but with a kind of sleepy disbelief, the kind you get when you've been surrounded by the same color palette for so long, blue, darker blue, angrier blue, that anything else feels like someone changed the channel without warning. One morning, you step onto the deck and the air smells different, less like salt and damp rope, more like earth, leaves, the vague promise of something non-oceanic. You blink into the haze and there it is, the faint outline of the South American coast, a smear of green and brown rising from the horizon like the world clearing its throat. After the brutal cold of Cape Horn, this feels almost soft. Sailors gather along the railing, leaning forward as if proximity alone will pull the shoreline closer. The officers pretend to be calm about it, but even they glance at the land with the same subtle hunger. Food, fresh water, solid ground, and the comforting knowledge that the earth is no longer moving beneath their feet. You try to mirror everyone's neutral expressions, but inside you're humming like a kettle about to boil. Land, actual land, soil, plants, roots. You want to run onto it barefoot, though that would be wildly suspicious behavior for Jean. As the étoile approaches the natural harbor, the details sharpen. Rolling hills, clusters of trees, rocky outcrops dusted in sunlight. It's the kind of place where a botanist's heart rate doubles without his permission. And you feel that same thrill too. A pull that comes from years of studying plants in the narrow margins of your old life. Out here, in a new world, everything could be something you've never seen. Before you even touch the shore, Commerson is buzzing with ideas. His seasickness temporarily retreats in the face of scientific excitement, which historically seems to be the only medicine strong enough to work on him. He spreads out his gear, checking jars, papers, tools, and making a mess that somehow counts as organized in the vocabulary of naturalists. You help him pack, your hands quick and practiced, though your mind is already in the forest ahead, imagining the textures and shapes waiting for you. When the crew lowers the longboat, you climb in carefully, keeping your posture steady and your disguise even steadier. The row toward shore is bumpy, the waves slapping the sides as if they resent being left behind. You glance over your shoulder and see the Etoile anchored offshore, looking smaller than you imagined, like a tired old bird resting its wings. And then your boots hit the shore. The earth feels solid, immovable, comforting in a way that makes you almost emotional, but you take a deep breath and swallow the urge to hug the ground. Totally normal behavior for Jean. Definitely. You step into a landscape buzzing with life. The air hums with insects, the leaves shimmer in the wind, and the ground smells like secrets waiting to be uncovered. Commerson immediately begins collecting bark, petals, stems, anything within reach, and you fall into your role as his shadow, though something about this land makes you feel less like a shadow and more like a co-navigator. You move through the brush with ease, spotting patterns, identifying medicinal hints, noticing which plants cling to the sunlight and which prefer the shadows. Commerson trusts your instincts enough to ask for your opinion, quietly, between labored breaths. You kneel beside a cluster of broad-leafed plants with roots that look like they're plotting something, and you scrape away soil with careful fingers, lifting specimens like treasures. Here's your mainstream historical note of the chapter. Bougainville's expedition was one of the first French ventures to systematically document the flora of South America and the Pacific, bringing back plants Europe had never seen, some medically valuable, others aesthetically shocking, all scientifically thrilling. Commerson's collection from this region would one day fill museums and botanical texts. But here's the part history keeps in softer shadows. So many of those discoveries came from your hands, your choices, your knowledge. You find a strange vine curling along a fallen log, its tendrils wiry and delicate, its flowers shaped like tiny lanterns. You show it to Commerson, who marvels at the structure as you already start imagining a dozen possible uses. He sketches, you examine. The partnership flows with an unspoken fluidity that historians still can't fully categorize. Some argue you were an assistant, others insist you were effectively a co-botanist whose credit got swallowed by the era's expectations. The debate continues like a scholarly ping-pong match. The deeper you walk inland, the more alive everything feels. Birds flash through the canopy in bursts of color. Insects chirp with the confidence of creatures unaware of future textbooks. And the plants shift from familiar to strange to possibly sentient. You keep careful notes, adjusting your handwriting to look as masculine as possible, though you suspect no one on this expedition has particularly elegant penmanship anyway. Hours pass in a blur of discovery. You fill pages with details, texture, scent, habitat, until your fingers ache. Commerson takes frequent rests, leaning on you lightly, a reminder of how much he depends on you. Sometimes you wonder if the officers notice the closeness. Sometimes you wonder if it matters. Everything on this voyage walks the edge between necessity and secrecy. At one point, you discover a plant with roots so bulbous and oddly shaped that you can't help the flicker of amusement. You call Commerson over, and the two of you stare at it in mutual confusion. Later, in European salons, scientists will debate its classification. Some will argue it belongs to a family never before documented. Others will insist someone simply misidentified it during the stressful conditions of a global voyage. Academic circles love ambiguity almost as much as they love botanical Latin. As the sun begins to dip, turning the sky gold, you gather your belongings and start the walk back toward the shore. The longboat waits, the sailors restless, the étoile silhouetted against the darkening horizon like a watchful guardian. You pause before stepping into the boat, looking once more at the tree line. The land feels ancient, alive, full of stories you barely touched. And you know this is only the beginning. South America will be the first of many worlds you step into. Worlds that will change the shape of your life, your identity, your name, even if the official record tries to erase the footprints you're leaving. By the time you climb back aboard the étoile, your clothes are damp with sweat and leaves cling to your sleeves. Commerson collapses gratefully into his hammock, making sounds that can only be described as scientific groans. You tuck away your collection notes and sit quietly for a long moment, feeling the ship beneath you like a heartbeat. You touched land today. You discovered new life today. You carved your initials, unseen, uncredited, into the story of science. And now, with the decks swaying gently and the dark creeping in, you let that pride settle somewhere deep, quiet, and steady inside you. Because this was your first landfall, and it won't be your last. You feel the warmth before you see the island. This thick, honey-soft glow in the air that clings to your skin in a way the southern waters never did. After weeks of cold winds and stern waves, the ocean suddenly exhales. The sky turns generous, and the étoile glides into a world that looks so gentle you almost distrust it. The sailors lean over the rails in a quiet, collective awe, because even the most hardened men of the expedition have heard rumors of this place. Tahiti, a word that has drifted through European ports like a half-remembered lullaby, lush, inviting, too beautiful to sound real. A place wrapped in stories sailors bring home the way others bring home scars. And now you're approaching it, disguised, exhausted, and trying very hard to look like Jean, a person who absolutely does not have any secrets that might unravel the second the ship touches land. The truth is, Tahiti is famous for something else too, something far more relevant to your situation. Its people are known for instantly reading strangers, for noticing what others miss, for observing the small details Europeans often overlook, which is less than ideal. As the ship moves closer, you see the shoreline in perfect clarity, palm trees swaying like they're performing a slow, knowing dance, mountains rising sharply behind them, sunlight scattering in patches across the lagoon. Canoes skim across the water like smooth, purposeful birds, each one carrying people who move with the self-assured rhythm of a culture that has lived in harmony with the ocean far longer than any European scholar has written about it. The officers try to maintain composure, straight backs, stern expressions, but you can feel the nervous excitement under their boots. The Bougainville expedition aims to build diplomatic ties, gather knowledge, observe customs. You are here to study plants, keep Commerson upright, and, very importantly, not be identified as a woman by anyone with eyes. You tell yourself you're ready. You pull your cap low, adjust your stance, deepen your voice in your mind. You rehearse the identity of Jean, the way someone rehearses lines for a play. But the moment the Tahitian canoes draw near, you can feel it. The shift, the attention, not suspicion, just seeing. The Tahitians climb onto the étoile with fluid, confident movements. They carry gifts, curiosity, and the kind of openness that feels like sunlight touching places you didn't know were shadowed. They look closely at the crew, laughing, talking, pointing out objects with fascination. Their presence is warm, free, honest. And then it happens. One of them pauses in front of you, just stands there, looking at you, not unkindly, not accusingly, just with soft eyes that say, "I know exactly who you are." Your chest tightens, your hands freeze. You're suddenly aware of every seam in your disguise, every inch of cloth pressed against your skin, every breath you're trying too hard to make sound masculine. The Tahitian tilts their head slightly, studying your face with an expression so gentle it's almost tender. Then they smile, a big, bright, unapologetic smile that radiates a message you understand instantly, even without words. You can lie to the French, you can lie to the sailors, but you cannot lie to us. They speak to their companions and you see the realization ripple through them. Warm, amused, not shocked, not offended. In Tahiti, gender fluidity, complex identities, and variations of dress are part of life. People live outside rigid European categories, and no one gasps dramatically when confronted with difference. There's no scandal here, no moral judgment, just recognition. The officers, of course, don't notice. They're busy with trade negotiations, inspecting gifts, adjusting their coats, and generally pretending they understand local customs based on the 5 minutes they've been here. The sailors are too distracted by the friendly chaos, laughing, exchanging gestures, admiring tattoos and ornaments. But the Tahitians notice you. They see you. They simply choose not to expose you. Or perhaps, more accurately, they don't think there's anything to expose. Later, you learn that Tahitian society includes mahu, individuals who live outside the male-female binary and are embraced as part of the community. The idea that someone might hide their identity out of fear is, to them, deeply foreign. Historians still debate how much the Tahitians understood about your particular deception, whether they thought you were a mahu, a woman in disguise, or something else entirely. But what academic circles do agree on is that the Tahitians treated you with kindness rather than suspicion. And honestly, that says more about their society than any textbook summary ever could. Throughout the day, you feel their eyes glance toward you with quiet humor, as if sharing an inside joke with the world's gentlest conspirators. One hands you a garland of flowers, light, fragrant, impossibly soft. You hesitate. Accepting something so delicate feels like a risk, but their expression says, "It's fine. You're safe." Commerson is oblivious, of course. He's too busy stumbling through the underbrush collecting plants like someone on a botanical treasure hunt. You help him, but your mind keeps drifting back to the shore. Those warm eyes, that smile, that effortless unraveling of your disguise. In the evening, as the sun spills gold across the water. You sit on the beach with a logbook open across your knees. The Tahitians move around you, laughing, paddling, sharing food, existing in a harmony that makes you acutely aware of the stiffness of European society. Here, nothing about you is dangerous. Here, you are simply another person on a shore, and for the first time your identity feels less like a secret and more like a truth the world might one day make room for. When you step onto the longboat to return to the atoll, you glance back at the beach. A Tahitian waves at you, broad, cheerful, knowing. You raise a hand in return, feeling something loosen inside your chest, something you hadn't realized was clenched. Tonight, you fall asleep in your hammock with the scent of flowers still clinging to your skin, the sound of island laughter echoing faintly in your ears. Tomorrow, the officers will continue the mission. Tomorrow, Commerson will chase more plants. Tomorrow, your disguise will tighten again. But for one day, just one, you were seen truly, fully, without judgment. And the world didn't end. You wake the next morning with the soft smell of flowers still clinging to you. Subtle, warm, like Tahiti left a fingerprint on your skin. But the mood aboard the atoll feels different now. Tighter, heavier, like the ship itself has caught wind of your secret and is trying to decide whether it should creak louder in disapproval. The officers move with this stiff-edged urgency, the kind that says something happened yesterday and no one's sure how to talk about it yet. Because the truth is simple and terrifying. Your disguise didn't survive Tahiti. The Tahitians saw through it effortlessly, kindly, even joyfully. But news like that doesn't stay on an island shore forever. Word reaches the officers, trickling in through murmurs, gestures, half-understood explanations, and the unmistakable clarity of locals pointing at you and saying things that the crew is only now realizing were, well, pretty obvious. At first, no one confronts you. They don't yell. They don't drag you to the officers' quarters. They don't summon the captain. But you can feel something shifting. Men who once walked past you without a second glance now linger for just a heartbeat longer. Some look confused, others curious, a few irritated as if gender is a rule they personally handcrafted and you've rudely smudged the ink. No one sees you as dangerous, exactly, just complicated. And sailors in the 18th century do not enjoy complications. You go about your duties quietly, pretending nothing is wrong. You carry crates, sort specimens, and attempt to maintain the careful posture of Jean, though the awareness of every eye brushing over you makes you feel like a painting slowly being examined for forgery. Commerson, naturally, notices everything and says nothing. His silence is its own kind of shield. He moves with a mix of worry and protectiveness, staying close enough that anyone confronting you would also have to confront the botanist, whose influence aboard the atoll is much larger than his health suggests. Whether he's doing this consciously, instinctively, or simply because he relies on you for almost everything, you can't tell. History still argues about that too. But the tension snaps a little when the officers finally call him in for a discussion. You remain on deck, hands frozen around a coil of rope, heart pounding with the steady drumbeat of, "This is it, this is it, this is it." Around you, sailors pretend not to watch. The sky above is bright and cloudless. The ocean below glitters with unsettling cheerfulness. You stand perfectly still, the disguise that has carried you for months now feeling like paper armor in a world full of storms. Commerson returns much later, pale but composed, and gestures for you to follow him below deck. His steps are slow, like each one is weighed down by the conversation he just had. When you finally sit in the cramped botanical workspace, lantern light flickering over jars and papers, the ship rocking just enough to remind you the world is unstable, he tells you the truth in short, clipped phrases. You are not in danger. You will not be expelled from the voyage, but your presence has to be managed, protected, contained, officially invisible. You nod, you swallow, you breathe. What else can you do? The alternative is collapse. Strangely, though, the crew does not erupt into mockery or outrage. They're sailors, men who have seen storms, scurvy, miracles, and the occasional talking parrot that swears like a politician. The idea that a woman has survived storms, hauled crates, climbed rigging, and worked herself to exhaustion beside them, it unsettles them, yes, but it also impresses them in a way they will never say aloud. They start looking at you differently, not with suspicion, but with a reluctant respect. And yet, the danger is real. On an expedition where women are explicitly forbidden, your presence could be used against Commerson, against the officers, against the entire mission. You become something fragile, political, precarious. So you shrink. You move less. You speak less. You stay tucked behind Commerson like a shadow refined into silence. You learn to calculate every moment, where to stand, how to breathe, which tasks you can still safely do without inviting scrutiny. You live in negative space, but the voyage keeps going. The Etoile leaves Tahiti, gliding away from the bright shore that undid your disguise with a single glance. You watch the island fade, a warm blur swallowed by horizon, and feel an ache in your chest you don't have words for. Not sadness exactly, more like the echo of something you weren't ready to lose. The next days unfold in a strange blur. Commerson throws himself into work, perhaps to distract himself from the tension, perhaps to protect you, perhaps because science is the only language he doesn't need to translate. You assist him quietly, moving with the practiced precision of someone trying to keep one part of their world from collapsing, while another part is already cracking. The officers keep a careful distance, watching, but not intervening. They have a mission. They want charts, specimens, documents, not scandals. The safest solution, they decide, is to look away. You become the secret everyone knows, but no one speaks aloud, a quiet exception to a loud rule. Still, there are moments that catch you off guard. A sailor silently hands you a bowl at dinner, no snide comments attached. Another wordlessly shifts his hammock so you have more space. Someone leaves an extra water flask near your station without explanation. Small kindnesses that feel enormous in their subtlety. History rarely records gestures like these, but lives are shaped by them. Late one night, after a long day spent sorting through a wave-damp collection of leaves, you step onto the deck for air. The stars are bright, scattered across the sky like seeds tossed by a careless god. You grip the railing, breathing deeply, letting the cold wind cool the burning worry in your chest. You are still here. You are still moving forward. You are still sailing around the world, something no woman has ever done, at least not in the records the world bothers to keep. You glance back toward the lantern-lit corridor where the officers sit, now aware of who you truly are, and you realize something quietly astonishing. They didn't break you. They didn't force you back into the mold you shattered.
They didn't erase you. You're still part of the voyage. Maybe not openly, maybe not safely, but undeniably. And the ocean, steady and endless beneath you, feels like it's whispering the same truth Tahiti did. You exist. You belong, even if the world isn't ready to admit it yet. You drift into the long, shimmering stretch of the Indian Ocean with the kind of weary resilience only months at sea can carve into a person. The air grows warmer again, thick, sticky, and heavy in a way that feels like the world has wrapped you in a damp towel. The sailors shed layers. The ship creaks with a looser rhythm, and even the waves seem to slow down as if the entire planet is taking one long, humid exhale. But for you, the Indian Ocean is not a vacation postcard. It is a shifting test of endurance, of secrecy, of the version of yourself you've stitched together so tightly it might split under the heat. Days blend into one another, a braided rope of chores, scientific work, and the quiet caution you now wear like a second shirt. The tension after Tahiti hasn't vanished, but it has softened, bending into a strange new normal. The officers watch you less intensely. The sailors fall back into their routines. And Commerson, though still pale, still fragile, still occasionally lost in a fog of illness, moves with a renewed determination, as if the best protection he can offer you is to keep you indispensable. The ocean glimmers with impossible shades of blue. Flying fish skip across the surface like handfuls of silver coins. The horizon stretches so far it feels like the world has forgotten where to end. And yet, despite the beauty, the heat becomes its own quiet enemy. You sweat through your shirt by mid-morning. The deck burns under the sun. Water supplies must be rationed carefully. The sailors complain loudly about the heat, the boredom, the food, the heat again. And you do your best to echo the grumbling without giving away the fact that the fabric you bind beneath your clothes now feels like a personal sauna. Every movement reminds you of the disguise. Every breath reminds you of its weight. You adapt. You have no choice. You stretch tasks out to avoid drawing attention. You take shorter breaks. You control your breathing the way one controls the flame of a candle in wind. At night, the air barely cools, but the sky opens into a breathtaking sprawl of stars so bright they look close enough to pluck. You stand on deck, the warm wood under your boots, and feel the kind of loneliness that has texture, soft, deep, pervasive. It hums beneath the surface of your days like a low drum. Scientists, sailors, officers, they have categories for everything on this ship. Tools, plants, storms, maps. But they have no category for you. You exist in the margins, the footnotes, the unwritten spaces. And the longer the voyage continues, the more you realize that survival isn't just physical, it's narrative. You must constantly rewrite who you are in the eyes of others. Still, you find small pockets of peace. One afternoon, dolphins race alongside the ship, weaving through waves with joyful arrogance. You watch them leap in arcs that glitter in the sunlight, and for a moment you forget the heat, the disguise, the endlessness of the sea. You forget everything except the simple fact that the world is astonishing. Commerson joins you, leaning heavily on the railing. His face is gaunt, his hands trembling, but his eyes brighten as he watches the animals cut through the water. He murmurs something about recording their behavior later, and you nod, already mentally arranging notes. You've learned to predict his needs before he speaks them. You've learned to complete his sketches when his hands shake. You've learned to carry the weight of the scientific mission on shoulders that haven't been credited,
but have carried the heaviest load all along. Here's your main historical fact for the chapter. The Indian Ocean leg of the Bougainville expedition was notorious for exhausting crews. Heat, dehydration, disease, dwindling supplies. Many voyages faltered here. Journals from sailors on multiple circumnavigations describe this stretch as the long unraveling, where tempers frayed and hope thinned. The ocean was beautiful, yes, but beauty could not be eaten, could not repair sails, could not quench thirst. Your crew feels it. You see the way their movements slow, the way arguments flare over nothing, the way sleep becomes shallow and restless. Sailors begin muttering superstitions again, bad omens in the wind, looming misfortune in the color of the waves. Some insist they've seen spirits dancing on the mast. Others blame the doldrums, the dead calm patches where the ship sits motionless, trapped under a sun so fierce it feels like a punishment. One day, as you help Commerson sort samples below deck, a jar slips from its shelf as the ship sways and shatters at your feet. The sound rings out like a gunshot. You freeze. Commerson freezes. The remaining jars tremble. For a moment, you're both silent. Then he exhales. Soft, tired, defeated. You gather the pieces together, fingers careful, and place them into a basin. It's a small loss. But on a voyage like this, small losses can feel enormous. You work in that silence for a long while, the air warm and thick, your heart beating that familiar, uneasy rhythm. And then, unexpectedly, Commerson mutters something so quietly you almost think you imagined it. A single sentence about how none of this would have been possible without you. You don't respond, not because you don't want to, but because you don't trust your voice to hold steady. Recognition, even whispered, even accidental, can feel like water in the desert. When night comes, the heat barely relents, but the ocean glows faintly with bioluminescence. Tiny sparks trailing behind the ship as if the sea is leaving a glowing signature in your wake. You trail your fingers in the water, letting the glowing ripples dance around your hand. And you think, I am here. I am part of this. A lesser-known fact, some sailors believed bioluminescence was a sign of good luck, a reminder that the sea could be generous when it wanted. Others believed it was the souls of drowned sailors guiding the living. Historians still debate which interpretation was more widely accepted, but the truth is, sailors clung to whatever gave them comfort. You understand that now more than ever. Tomorrow, the voyage will continue its slow drift toward the islands ahead. Tomorrow, the heat will return. Tomorrow, you will keep moving, keep working, keep breathing inside your carefully guarded identity. But tonight, with the stars overhead and the glowing sea beneath you, something softens, just a little. The world feels vast, but somehow you no longer feel lost inside it. You don't realize you're approaching Mauritius at first. The air shifts slowly, gently, the way a dream changes scenes without announcing it. One morning, the wind smells less like open ocean and more like soil warming under sunlight. The waves soften. The sky takes on a friendlier shade of blue, as if the world is hinting that you're nearing a place where things finally might ease. And then you see it, a smudge of green rising from the horizon, mountain peaks wrapped in mist, a shoreline so calm it feels like an apology from the universe. Mauritius, a name whispered among sailors as both refuge and temptation, a place where ships stop to recover, to restock, to breathe. And for you, even though you don't quite know it yet, it will become something else entirely, a pause in your journey, a strange, unexpected chapter where time moves differently. When the Etoile anchors offshore, the relief across the crew is almost tangible. Men lean against the railing with the heavy exhale of people who've been cramped, overheated, and half delirious for weeks. Commerson, paler than he should be, leaning on your arm, looks at the island with the kind of longing usually reserved for warm beds and second chances. You help him into the longboat, keeping your movements steady, your disguise in place. Though by now, everyone knows who you are, or at least the parts they can make sense of. The officers no longer glare. The sailors no longer whisper. They have simply folded your existence into the unspoken fabric of the voyage. You are still Jean when needed, Beret when addressed, and always, quietly in the background, the person who keeps the botanist alive. When your boots hit solid ground, it feels like stepping into a new version of reality. Soft earth, sweet air, real color. Mauritius hums with life. Birds call from branches overhead. Leaves rustle in warm breezes. Flowers bloom in explosions of pink, orange, and gold. You walk slowly, letting your senses fill, the weight of months at sea sliding off your shoulders like damp cloth. Commerson, despite his exhaustion, is electrified. His eyes snap open with scientific hunger. Here, in this small island bursting with endemic species, he sees endless possibilities. Plants that exist nowhere else on Earth. Patterns untouched by European classification systems. Fragrances he's never inhaled. Shapes he's never sketched. Roots that promise chemical secrets. But this time, something shifts in how the work happens, because this is where you stop being background. Mauritius becomes your proving ground. You explore the forests with a freedom the ship never allowed. You gather specimens with expertise sharpened by months at sea. You guide Commerson to plants he would never have noticed. You prepare samples with skill so precise it borders on artistry. Local settlers watch you with a mixture of curiosity and admiration, not for your disguise, but for your knowledge. Because here, you are not pretending to be a man. You are pretending to be exactly what you are, a scientist. You and Commerson rent a small house from the local French authorities, a quiet place near the base of the mountains. While he recovers his strength, you take over the physical demands of the work. You climb slopes, wade through streams, pick your way across volcanic rock. You return home with arms full of leaves and pockets full of seeds. And you start compiling something extraordinary. Dozens of species, hundreds of specimens, pages and pages of notes, some written in your hand, others dictated quietly by Commerson, all of them shaped by your mind. One particularly strange discovery earns your laughter. A plant whose fruit swells into awkward, lumpy shapes that look like they were designed by someone who had only heard of fruit through vague rumor. When you bring it back, Commerson studies it and mutters something about evolutionary eccentricities. Later, academic circles will debate the classification of this plant so fiercely that it becomes one of those amusing footnotes in history where scientists argue passionately over something that smells faintly like wet socks. Mauritius is full of moments like that. Small discoveries, unexpected humor, quiet triumphs. But it's not all ease. Life on the island is slower, yes, but also more revealing. With fewer people, fewer distractions, fewer tasks, there is more room for your thoughts to wander. More time to consider what comes next. More moments when you feel the weight of your disguise, not as danger, but as distance. Distance from your old life, distance from your real name. distance from who you might have been in a world less tangled. Still, you wake each morning with purpose. You slip into the forests. You learn the terrain by heart. You help Commerson catalog an entire island's worth of botanical wonders. And despite the challenges, you begin to feel something you haven't felt since before the voyage began: stability. For a time, Mauritius holds you gently. You work, you rest, you grow. And while the officers on the Étoile continue their duties, your world becomes rooted in soil instead of salt water. Here's a small but delightful historical tidbit. Mauritius was home to the now extinct dodo. By the time you arrive, the bird is already gone, victim of colonization and careless hunting. But locals still tell stories about its odd shape, its waddling strut, its general vibe of confused friendliness. You hear the tales while collecting samples near a rocky cliff, listening with fascination tinged by a sadness you didn't expect. The dodo becomes a symbol to you, not just of extinction, but of everything fragile in a world ruled by human priorities. Historians argue, of course they do, whether you truly mourned the loss, or whether it was simply another scientific curiosity for the team. But you know the truth. Some things stay with you, even if they're only memories passed down through the wind. Days stretch, weeks settle, months pass like water slipping through fingers, and then news arrives. The voyage must continue. Your time on Mauritius, this strange, unexpected interlude, has come to an end. You pack the notebooks carefully. You wrap the specimens in cloth. You help Commerson prepare for travel again. And as you look at the forest one last time, you feel an ache you haven't felt in years. Not because you're leaving a place of safety, but because you're leaving a place where, for the first time in a long while, you could simply exist without looking over your shoulder. Tomorrow the ocean will return. Tomorrow the voyage resumes its unfinished path. But tonight, standing under the warm Mauritian dusk, you let yourself breathe. Slowly, deeply, fully. Because this chapter, this brief, gentle pause, has carved a new strength into you. And the world ahead, vast and unpredictable, will need every bit of it. You don't hear the summons back to the voyage so much as feel it. This slow, tightening tug in the air, like a string pulling you away from the quiet life Mauritius allowed you. One morning, the harbor wakes louder than usual. Sailors shout instructions, officers trade clipped orders, and the Étoile rocks at anchor like a restless animal ready to move again. Your heart sinks a little, though you hide it well. Mauritius had given you something rare: steadiness. A place where you could walk without bracing. A place where your footsteps didn't need to match anyone else's expectations. But voyages, like seasons, don't pause just because someone grew attached to the scenery. Commerson feels it too. He stands by the small window of your rented house, looking out toward the shoreline with a wistfulness that mirrors your own. His health has recovered enough to travel again, though he still leans on your shoulder more often than he admits. The island changed him, slowed him, softened him, gave him space to breathe. Leaving feels like pulling up roots that never had a chance to grow deep. You pack slowly, jars wrapped, plants pressed, notebooks protected like fragile lungs. There's something strangely poetic about preparing to leave a place that never intended to keep you. The forest doesn't cling. The mountains don't whisper farewell. The birds go on singing as if nothing has shifted. But you feel it, the gentle ache of a chapter closing. When you return to the harbor, The crew greets you with nods, half smiles, and the kind of familiarity born from surviving storms, heat, and each other's questionable hygiene. They've accepted you in their own way, not loudly, not publicly, but practically. And in an 18th century world, practical acceptance is practically affection. Still, as you step onto the longboat and watch Mauritius shrink behind you, something inside you tightens. The voyage ahead isn't a simple return. It's fragmented, complicated, a patchwork of routes and decisions driven not by discovery this time, but by survival. Because here's the less glamorous historical note for this chapter. Not all expeditions travel in clean, straight lines. Many break apart, reroute, scatter, especially when supplies run low or crew members become ill or political pressures shift. The Bougainville expedition is no exception, and from this point forward, your path home will look less like a line on a map and more like a puzzle spilled across a table. Back aboard the Étoile, the routine feels both familiar and foreign. The ship smells the same: salt, rope, tar. But you've changed. Mauritius taught you how it feels to be grounded. Now the ocean feels like an old acquaintance whose unpredictable moods you've learned to tolerate. Commerson settles into his corner of the lower deck. You help him organize the specimens, the tools, the countless jars that clink with every sway of the ship. But the space feels different now, smaller, tighter. After tasting the freedom of land, the Étoile's walls pinch a bit. The officers gather the crew for a meeting. Their faces are serious, but tired. These men have also traveled far, endured more than they recount, and now must steer the expedition toward its fragmented end. You stand at the edge of the group, listening. They outline the new route. Stops dictated by weather, politics, supplies, ports that may or may not receive them. A journey that is no longer about exploration, but endurance. The sailors groan softly, not in defiance, but resignation. Long voyages change people. They stretch them in invisible ways. You can see it in the crew's posture. Shoulders sloped with fatigue, eyes dulled by months of routine, steps slower from aches that don't fully heal. And you, carrying your disguise, your duty, your uncredited brilliance, you feel stretched too. Days pass in a blur of tasks. You help Commerson write entries for his journals, meticulously transferring notes from crumpled scraps to formal pages. The harsh truth is clear. These writings may one day appear under his name, not yours. Historians will later debate how much of the work belongs to you. But debates feel distant here, small ripples compared to the vastness of the ocean beneath you. Still, you write, because the work matters, and because your voice, even hidden inside someone else's pages, still shapes the world. At one stop, a small colonial port, the crew is granted permission to trade supplies. You walk through it carefully, moving like a shadow. People glance your way, but the officers subtly guide you through the least crowded areas. They haven't forgotten Tahiti. They haven't forgotten the risk, but they also haven't abandoned you. You overhear sailors swapping stories that twist the truth, legends already blooming from misunderstanding. One man claims Barrett is actually a prodigy boy disguised to avoid draft laws. Another swears you're some kind of mysterious apprentice with questionable origins. A third insists you're actually a spy. You almost laugh. Somehow the truth feels easier than their fiction, but also more dangerous. During one evening at anchor, Commerson asks you to fetch a notebook from his trunk. As you sift through the familiar chaos, pages, leaves, tools, you find something unexpected. A pressed flower carefully tucked between blank sheets, not labeled, not sketched, just preserved quietly. A Mauritian bloom. You stare at it for a long moment, tracing the delicate shape with your eyes. Commerson didn't comment on it, didn't include it in his formal notes. He simply kept it. And you understand exactly why. Some things are kept not for science, but for memory. That night, as the crew sleeps in uneven hammocks, you stand on the deck watching the stars expand above you. The constellations feel different now. Not maps, not guides, but witnesses. They've watched you change. They've watched you cross oceans, disguised as someone the world would accept. They've watched you carve your place in the shadows of a voyage that will never fully know your name. But the fragmentation of the route home brings something else too. Autonomy. You're no longer following a strict expedition plan. You're following a drifting path shaped by circumstances. And in that loosened structure, you find a strange, unexpected gift. Choice. Small ones, yes. When to rest, where to collect samples during stops, how to pace your tasks. But even small choices feel revolutionary after months of rigid schedules and secret keeping. Weeks pass, more ports, more drift, more moments that slip between the lines of official history. One evening, as the sun melts into the sea and paints the deck in orange light, you feel something settle inside you. A realization. You're not going home the same person who left France. You're not even going home as the person the world thinks you are. You're returning as someone transformed by oceans, storms, islands, secrets, and pages filled with discoveries carrying someone else's signature. But they are your discoveries too, your journey too, your legacy too, whether the world acknowledges it or not. As the étoile creaks into another night, you rest your hands on the railing and let the salt wind fill your lungs. The voyage is fractured now, but so is your fear. You're no longer breaking apart. You're becoming something new. The ocean ahead feels looser now, less like a path and more like a suggestion. After weeks of fragmenting routes and improvised stops, the étoile settles into a strange in-between space, drifting not by choice, but by circumstance. You can sense it in the officers' tense whispers, in the sailors' resigned sighs, even in the way Commerson grips the railing when he walks on deck. No one knows the exact shape of the journey home anymore. And somehow, that uncertainty becomes your new normal. You move through the ship with the ease of someone who has long since memorized every groan of timber, every shift in wind, every creak that announces a change in weather or mood. But something inside you is changing too. A quiet readiness, an unexpected steadiness, a sense that each passing day pulls you closer to the version of yourself who can face what comes next. Not every transformation is loud. Some are soft, slow, tidal. Your tasks remain the same: caring for Commerson, documenting specimens, keeping the fragile collection safe from humidity and sailor clumsiness. But your mind has begun to stretch toward home. A home you haven't seen in years. A home that, if you're honest, no longer fits the shape of who you are. But the ocean doesn't care about your internal poetry. It has new trials ready. The winds shift. The weather cools. The sky turns a shade of gray that sailors recognize immediately. The edge of another system. Not a storm this time. Something calmer, steadier, but still harsh in its own quiet way. A relentless mist rolls across the deck for days, turning your clothes damp and your notebooks into soft, dangerous curls. You hide the pages in oilskin bundles, praying to every ocean spirit you've heard of that the ink won't run. This is where the long fatigue sets in, the kind that doesn't come from danger, but from duration, from the simple, exhausting truth of still not being home. You work, you rest, you repeat. You listen to the ship breathe. You watch sailors play dice with the blank-eyed commitment of men who've run out of stories to tell. You see one man carve a tiny bird out of driftwood and hang it by his hammock, a little symbol of something that can fly when he cannot. And in the midst of all this, Commerson weakens, not dramatically, not frighteningly, just inevitably. His legs take longer to steady. His handwriting trembles more. The strain of the voyage, the years of illness, the sheer volume of work he insists on finishing, it all wears him down. You stay close, adjusting his posture, holding lanterns steady while he sketches, carrying the heavier tools, doing everything except telling him outright that he needs to rest. Because he won't. He knows the work matters. You know the work depends on you. And the crew knows the voyage depends on both of you surviving it. One afternoon, during a rare moment of weak sunlight, sailors scrub the deck while the officers gather near the bow to discuss maps. Their conversation drifts toward the same topic every navigator in this era wrestles with: how to reach Europe without losing half the crew or running out of supplies. Every route has risks. Every port has politics. Every choice has consequences. You stand beside Commerson, watching them argue softly, and you feel something profound and unexpected. You're not afraid of the way home, not anymore. The fear that once clung to your disguise, your secret, your very presence aboard this ship, it's thinning. Not because the danger is gone, if anything, it lurks constantly, but because you've changed too much to be ruled by it anymore. You have crossed oceans disguised as someone you were not. You've endured storms that challenged even seasoned sailors. You've made discoveries that reshape European science. You've lived through exposure, acceptance, suspicion, and silence. You've survived isolation, illness, heat, hunger, and uncertainty. After all that, what is one more continent between you and home? Of course, life at sea doesn't let you wax poetic for long. As the ship approaches another small port, one of the many colonial outposts scattered across the Indian Ocean, you feel the crew's nerves tighten. These stops are unpredictable. Some ports refuse entry, others allow only partial trade. A few let you anchor offshore long enough to refill water casks and nothing more. This port is cautious, but welcoming enough. You disembark with Commerson, helping him navigate uneven ground as locals guide you toward the market area. The air here smells like spices and smoke, a warm contrast to the cool, damp world you left behind on the ship. You find fresh produce, herbs, and even a few plants that catch Commerson's fading spark of curiosity. You collect samples discreetly, mindful that every gesture must still look like Jean being helpful, not Jean absorbing knowledge the world says she shouldn't have. You overhear conversations in languages you don't know, stories from sailors who've been to places beyond your imagination, snippets of rumors about empires clashing and trade shifting. The world feels vast again, messy, alive, impossible to grasp all at once. Historians still argue whether this particular port influenced decisions later in the voyage. Some claim it was merely a logistical stop. Others insist it offered critical supplies that allowed the étoile to survive the next leg. The debate continues, as academic debates always do. But what you remember most is simpler. The feeling of being surrounded by life that didn't care who you were pretending to be. For a few hours, you were just another traveler with tired feet and a pocket full of lists. When you return to the ship, the officers look relieved, as if the world has granted them one small kindness by letting the resupply go smoothly. But night brings a quiet word among the crew, a whisper that spreads slowly. The final stretch is beginning. You stand at the railing, watching the lanterns flicker across the water. The air tastes different again, sharper, more purposeful, as if the ocean itself knows the direction has shifted from wandering to returning. And somewhere within you, a new awareness begins to form, slowly, carefully, like the first outline of a map being drawn. The next chapter won't be about what you discover. It will be about what you become. You feel the change before you see it, this subtle tightening in the wind, this quiet alignment of currents, this almost imperceptible sense that the world has finally decided to point you in one direction instead of scattering you like loose pages in a storm. The étoile creaks with a steadier rhythm. The officers consult maps with a kind of hushed focus. Even the sailors, who long ago ran out of new complaints, walk with a little more lift in their steps. It hits you slowly, like dawn light creeping across a floor. You're going home. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon enough that the idea stops feeling like superstition and starts feeling like gravity. The ocean has carried you for years. It has softened you, sharpened you, tested you, hidden you, revealed you. It has turned you into something the person who left France could never have imagined. And now, it's guiding you back. Not as the servant you once were, not as the assistant history will pretend you were, but as the first woman to circle the globe. Even if the world won't say your name yet. The ship sails into cooler waters. Gone are the humid nights when you lived inside a heat you couldn't escape. Gone are the tropical breezes that smelled like fruit bruising in sunlight. Now the wind is crisp again, brushing against your face with the unmistakable promise of northern latitudes. You pull your coat tighter, the same coat you've worn through storms and shores and islands you still dream about. The fabric is thinned, patched, softened by salt and time. You have too. Commerson spends more time resting now. His body has given you everything it can, and the years of strain are beginning to show. You sit beside him during long evenings, writing under lantern light while he dictates in measured breaths. His voice is weaker, but his mind remains sharp, a restless machine that refuses to slow. You take the notes carefully, knowing full well they will become part of the work that bears his name. Historians will argue forever about which discoveries belong to him and which belong to you. And you know the truth buried in the silence of those pages. Nothing in the official journals makes sense without you. One afternoon, while organizing specimens in the dim belly of the ship, you pause over a plant you collected on Mauritius, a leaf with veins so intricate they look like a map of tiny rivers. You hold it up to the lantern and let the light pass through. The green glows like stained glass, and for a moment you see every version of yourself layered like growth rings. The girl who worked in fields, the woman who hid in plain sight, the explorer who crossed oceans, the scientist who shaped knowledge, the traveler who never stopped moving. It's strange, standing here in the womb of the ship, to realize how many versions of you have fit inside so small a space. The days grow shorter, the nights colder. The crew murmurs about Europe like it's a dream they once had and forgot how to remember correctly. You hear snippets of plans, letters to send, families to face, taverns to visit, debts to settle. Home means so many things to different people. You're still figuring out what it means to you. One evening, the ship anchors near a final supply point. One last place to restock before crossing the long, impatient stretch of sea toward France. The port is quiet, unremarkable, the kind of place that history forgets but travelers remember because their hearts were too tired to care about scenery. The officers go ashore. The sailors follow in shifts. You stay with Commerson, who sleeps more than he speaks now. The sunset paints the deck in brush strokes of gold. You stand in the fading light, hands on the railing, feeling the cold metal press into your palms. Somewhere across this ocean lies the life you left behind, though you suspect it won't fit anymore. You've grown beyond the outlines of your past. Here's your historical anchor for this chapter. When Jeanne Barré finally returned toward France, she didn't arrive with fanfare. There were no parades, no speeches, no recognition waiting at the harbor. Voyagers often slipped back into civilian life quietly, especially those without rank or wealth. And for someone like you, someone who traveled the world disguised, someone without official credit, your arrival would have been just another line in a ship's log, a cold, practical truth. But here's the cold, delightful twist. You didn't return empty-handed. The collection of plants, seeds, and notes you safeguarded across oceans would become one of the most important assemblages of its era. It would shape European botany. It would help define species that scholars still write about. And many modern historians, after bickering over sources, interpretations, and missing pages, now agree that much of the fieldwork attributed to Commerson bears your fingerprints. They still argue about exactly how much, of course. Academics love arguing. It gives them a sense of survival. But the shape of the truth has grown clearer over time. As the Étoile prepares to depart the final port, you take one last look at the shoreline. The officers shout commands. The sailors haul the anchor. The ropes groan as they tighten. The ship shivers with purpose. This is it. The last stretch. The final ribbon of ocean winding toward the continent you left as someone entirely different. You stand on the deck as the sails swell with wind, watching the land shrink slowly into a silhouette. You feel a strange lightness, not relief, not joy, not sadness, but something softer and more complicated. The ocean has carved you into a new shape. It has stripped you down, built you up, carried you farther than anyone expected. It has been your adversary and your sanctuary, your teacher and your witness. And now it's letting you go. You close your eyes and breathe the cold air deeply. Salt, wind, wood, rope, the smells you've lived inside for years. When you open your eyes again, the horizon stretches wide and open, waiting for the moment your story completes its quiet circle. You grip the railing gently, knowing this simple truth. You left France as someone the world wouldn't have allowed to sail. You return as someone the world can no longer deny existed. You've done the impossible in plain sight, and you've done it with courage the ocean itself would respect. Drift now into sleep,
letting the ocean's memory cradle you as your mind floats effortlessly into dream. Good night.